what does the end user of the future look like? Is it going to be artificial intelligence? Is it going to be some kind of machine? Will I be replaced? That conversation is not new. I found newspaper articles from London from the year 1800 something that were talking about that exact problem. So it's, again, not a new problem, but it becomes bigger and bigger as we go because things are going faster and faster. What does this mean? This means we are living in a VUCA world. Who has heard the term VUCA already before? All of you? Now, this is really fascinating for a couple of reasons. Imagine you're driving down the road and it's getting dark and, you know, the weather's getting really, really, really nasty and bad. And you're driving towards this lighting and it's just incredible. It's awful. It's just, you don't know where to go. Your navigation system doesn't work. You're in a foreign environment. You simply don't know what to do. That's exactly the situation of sales leaders these days. Many times, very often. I talk to many of them. So living in a VUCA world means, of course, volatility. There's high speed and unpredicted and unexpected challenges. Uncertainty. Uncertainty is the killer number one when you talk to your team members, when you talk to your customers. Uncertainty is something that needs to be addressed. Complexity. Oh my goodness, I cannot understand anything anymore. And of course, ambiguity. The world becomes blurry and fuzzy and we don't really know how to make decisions or executive decisions or how to deal with a situation in the family. It's not just only business related, it's something very personal. And that's another reason why this fascinates me so much, because so many things I can apply in my real life. And I do know people outside of SAP. I have friends who have normal jobs. So imagine the world would look like this. Very nice and sunny, there's some clouds, everything's blooming, and there's a nice road ahead, slightly curved, and it's really pleasant. Imagine you can move from the VUCA world to what Bob Johansson of the Institute for the Future, and this institute exists, Institute for the Future, calls VUCA Prime. And the core concept is to move from volatility to vision. Now, as sales managers, of course, got to have a vision statement, mission. Yeah, but be clear to focus on what you really want to achieve. Provide the context that is so important, to really provide the context. To move from uncertainty to understanding. Now, uncertainty, the killer number one. What if people would really understand what you are trying to achieve? What if you would understand what their concerns are? So it's both ways. And it's about unimagined perspectives. So this gaining different perspectives and being open to gain different perspectives and look at what the critics have to say for a moment and understand their arguments helps you sharpen your own perspective. Super important. Actively listening, that is easily said. Yeah. And it's very hard to be done, especially in a remote environment where, by the way, this is my first business trip here since March 2020. Yeah. I realize people have legs. Being in a home office type of environment, it makes it really hard to get your point across that you want to actively listen as a manager, as a leader. But I do not want to talk about that today. Moving from complexity to clarity. Oh my goodness, now I understand what he or she has in mind. Now I demonstrate I demonstrate why it's important and why it's important for me to gain the view of other perspectives. Communication and transparency is key, also easily said. The last point, moving from ambiguity to agility. Oh, what if we do not follow the plan? What if we say, I don't even know how to move forward. Let's figure this out together. Let's test and try and learn by failing. And I'll come to that in a moment. But these were the topics that were driving me to engage in a master project around sales leadership in the digital future.
I've got a question then for you, Louise, around what can sales leaders do to create that sort of environment for innovation for their teams?
So, innovation needs some downtime, some thinking time, some space. It's, this is what I believe, that yes, there's times for people to think independently, to let ideas mull and create, and then bring them together in the team to have that collaboration and sharing. But that's when the whole psychological safety comes in. Let everybody have a say. Let's listen to all the little nuggets that each person has. Again, that combination of giving people some time to think, some training, some ways to generate new ideas, and then bring them all together to really consider how can they do things better. Appreciative inquiry is a good one. Remembering what you do well, how can you build on that? But people need time to think like that. And because of the fast pace that we're all working at, we don't often give ourselves that time.
Your point about sort of coming into the office and that sort of social interaction as well is talking about innovation. I think you can do so much more with personal innovation than you can do, through physical being in the same room than remotely potentially. There's something special about bringing people together in a structured way, perhaps giving them the time to reflect and brainstorm and innovate, which you don't get with people who are remote working all the time. So I'm really pleased now that we're seeing this trend to come together more often. There's a balance, obviously, with this hybrid world in which we live. But there was an interesting LinkedIn article about the randomness. I don't know if you've seen it, posted by someone who's quite close to us, Claudia. And it's this notion of innovation and random thoughts. And it just sparked this whole idea around innovation, and how important that is in a world that's changing so quickly.
Yeah.
And I love the fact you talk about space. And I know we're coming at space from slightly two different angles here, because do you remember the space curve that we developed as a consequence of the pandemic? I think that's so true now. Space was, survival, then preservation, and then agility and co-creation. So I agree. Yeah, in a world that's so fast moving, being able to find that time to reflect is so important. I think it's really difficult because there's no doubt that this year we're going to see targets increasing and resources decreasing, and it's just going to be putting a huge amount of pressure, I think, on sales teams to hit their targets and quota. I think we've seen a survey recently that talked about, quotas being increased, and I think that's so true. Never seen a year where targets have decreased, even with all of these external factors going on. So to be able to do it, I think is going to take a lot of mental resilience, I think, to make sure that we can give the teams the space to be able to innovate and come together and reflect.
Is creating space for an individual or a team as simple as blocking out time in the diary? Or how would you as a leader advise sales leaders to create that space for the teams?
It's a really difficult one. So everyone's so individual, but I think it's knowing what the person. So there is something there about getting to know individuals more personally, and how might they create that space, asking them that question. So for those that like the walking, sessions, for those that like to just sit down and read and ponder, but it's I guess trying to talk to them about how can they do that? What makes them innovate? For me, if I'm on a walk, I've got ideas spinning around all over. I think much better outside than I do inside. So, or when I'm driving, actually, sometimes then you can never write it down, can you? But anyway, so I guess it's individual, but you've just got to have those conversations. I think there is something now as well about knowing your team, really knowing them, understanding what makes them tick and helping them with that, rather than treating everybody the same.
I think it's culture, isn't it? We talk about culture and strategy, and it's what kind of culture do you want to create in your team? And if you've got a culture that you can encourage of reflection and practice and recognizing the importance of giving people time, then you will you will make space for yourself to do it, but also other people around you to do it. So I think a lot of this is about the way in which sales leaders need to create the right culture to enable their sales teams to thrive.
From my experience as well, because I know very well that we will get caught in the trap when we need to deliver results, is often, especially as we kind of get towards the end of a quarter per se, that's the time really you need to have that space when the pressure is really increasing, to think creatively and innovatively. I mean, one thing that I think is incredibly effective, certainly with my team, is creating space for coaching conversations as well. Because it's through coaching where you're encouraging that sort of reflective practice, that can enable, the individual to come up with ways of taking control of something, or innovative ideas that they may not have otherwise thought of. But having those coaching conversations really, helps. Certainly if they're not managing to find time in their weeks to kind of take themselves out of that situation for reflective thought.
Well, I think before perhaps we go into how sort of it works, I think it'd be quite good to take a couple of steps back, if that's okay. And I'd just like to talk about what we mean by culture. I think that's I'd love to have that discussion with you. And you've used the word values quite a bit as well as we've been talking, and how the same word can be misinterpreted, by different people, and you come up with a very different perception, I guess, of what is meant by certain values, and that influences culture in some way, I guess. That it can translate into a very different type of culture depending on how you see different things, even though the words are very similar. So could you explain to our listeners what you mean by culture and the link maybe with values?
Yeah, absolutely. So culture, or I'll go a step back. If you look at the organization, the organization has a structure, has a leadership, has brands, has technology, products, but it also has culture. And culture is something that connects all this together. Some parts of the culture are typical of the environment, let's say, depending on which part of the world you are. Some part of the culture depends on in which area of business are you working, but some of it's very unique. So culture is something that anyone feels without knowing why. Yeah. So when you talk to someone, the impression they give you, it's a culture. It's not just the words they say, but it's how they do things. When you read about the company in the newspapers or hear about on TV, the way they talk about them, the way their people make public appearances, it's culture. So culture is something that is so extremely unique that, for example, everything can be stolen or copied from an organization. Brands, people can be stolen, name can be, technology can be stolen, but the culture cannot be done because it's so unique and depends on all different aspects of organization. Starting from, as I mentioned before, where does the company name, for example, very simple thing. Do you call each other by names? This is something that can depend on where you come from. I know that when I started to work, for example, and I worked with German companies, at that time, they were all calling each other by surnames. Yeah. And it was part of the culture of the whole country, not just the culture of the company. Yeah. But once you went into UK, for example, everybody was calling each other by name. So that is a very simple influence of the surrounding. But then you have also the influence of the values of the people who are in charge. Yeah. So if the leader, the owner, CEO, the leadership team or just the person who is a key opinion leader in your group behaves certain way, then this creates the culture in the company.
It's a really interesting, I think everyone, of course, will know and have come across that word, culture. I think what is more complex, and perhaps this is part of what you are sort of, if you like, getting to the core of, is it's a complex amalgam of the influences that come to bear on an organization, which is influenced maybe by the culture of the country in which you live. It's influenced by the leadership styles, like you've just mentioned, and I really like this notion as well that you've just mentioned about the fact that people can, steal or copy, similar things that you might be copying from a marketing point of view, but they can't copy culture. Culture is something that's totally unique, to an organization. But it's got lots of moving parts, I guess. It is the leaders, but it's also, I guess, the people that work inside an organization as well. It's not just down to the leader that the culture is going to be defined. I would imagine, the bigger the company, perhaps the more you're going to be influenced by all the layers of management and people, that help build a culture. Do you think, Vesna, or not? Yeah,
absolutely, Phil. If you look at a startup, for example, let's look into the startup which was organized, set up by two people. Yeah, they create a culture among themselves. Yeah, and if their value, they can be different in style, like Mateusz and me. Mateusz is introvert, I'm extrovert. Yeah, but that doesn't really influence the values that we have. Yeah, so if we have similar values, the organization will grow in similar way because we will employ people who have similar values, or if we employ someone who doesn't have similar values, soon there will be a clash. Yeah, and if there will be a clash, you can sometimes maybe keep a person because you need that profile, but in long term this will not work because everyday situations, everyday activities will be performed completely different by that person, in line with values or not in line with values, than you would do them as a owner, for example. So this is where there are two owners, and one new person comes in. So that one new person will adopt, adjust or leave. Yeah. Once you grow, for example, up to there is a theory that says that up to approximately 150 to 200 people, the culture and the values can be transformed down from the leadership to the employees. This, of course, depends if they're sitting together, if they meet each other very often, because you can lead by example. And leading by example is the most powerful way of transforming culture to others. But the bigger the company, or if they sit in different locations or in different countries, like the multinationals, like I mentioned, GSK had a completely different culture in CEE than the global culture. It was not in conflict, right? It was just different. Or I would say maybe it was in conflict sometime, but it was not better or worse. It was just different. And a lot of people who came to work from one part of GSK to another might have felt more comfortable in one team than in the another. And that is not about their professional abilities. It was not about their knowledge. It was about culture.
Phil, how do you think the influence of AI is going to affect those in sales, in a selling role? And the second part to my question is, could AI take over what a salesperson does?
Thank you, Will. And I was going to throw that question back at you as well, but I won't. I'll give it an answer. I mean, I think that sales is approaching a kind of new frontier in many ways. And I think traditionally we've seen the kind of sales systems and tools that are supporting the salesperson very much being designed. I'm talking here about CRM and other tools, designed to serve management. And and salespeople have seen these as a tool to actually make their life more complicated and more difficult. And I've not come across many organizations who have said to me, do you know something? Our CRM is wonderful. And I just love spending time keying in information and data to it. And I think what's exciting about the future in terms of technology is that we're seeing that there are tools now being designed and built which put the salesperson very much at the center of their focus. So these are tools that can enable a salesperson to better predict, how much income they may be getting from their territories, or better respond to questions or about an RFP that may be issued. So no, I think we're really at an exciting point, and I think we've got kind of 2 points of view about ChatGPT. The one is that it's going to be an incredibly useful sales tool in the sense of making it much quicker for salespeople to draft emails or do research. I mean, it's quite unbelievable the power that this tool has to get data together from different sources. But I mean, we are all obviously concerned from an educational point of view about issues of plagiarism, and to what extent will these technologies start to kind of move into the area of manipulation and not being authentic, which is one of the key sort of values and principles of selling that so much of our sales approach is kind of based on. So I think it's going to be an incredibly exciting future, actually. I think we've just seen the start of it, and I think it's really going to revolutionize how salespeople sell. I think your second question was, is it going to make the role of sales redundant? Or you're saying, is it the role of marketing is going to become redundant as well? I'm looking at Eddie here, listening in as well. So no, I think it's going to make life much easier. I think we're going to become more productive in how we do things, leveraging these kind of technologies. So no, I'm feeling optimistic about it, in fact.
Okay, so we don't need to all find new jobs just yet.
I don't think so. I mean, I remember being on an airplane traveling back from, I think it was, funny enough, I think in Budapest, where you recently had your long weekend, Will. And I remember sitting next to this lady from, I think she was working for McKinsey. And when I told her what I did for a living, this is going back 20, 25 years. And I said I was in sales. And she said, why on earth would you want to be in sales? Sales is going to become redundant soon. And so, and she was talking about the role of inside sales and taking away from field sales. So, and here we are 20 years later, still sales as a percentage of population is about 5% of a nation's population are involved in the sales kind of capacity, either in retail sales or B2B sales. So it's still a massively important area of what we do. But no, I think salespeople are going to be enabled actually by the technologies around them. There may be some changes, to the way sales teams are structured. But I think that it's going to help us do more with the resources we've got. There may be some reduction of headcount. I'm not sure. I think it's still early days, really.
I think it will impact on salespeople in the sense of the skills that they may need to develop. How to leverage technologies, how to look at data, how to analyze it, how to get the most out of, say, AI in order to meet customer requirements better. Because I think the expectation from customers is also going to shift.
Yeah, I think it's we've always kind of talked about what are some of the key skills and competencies required of salespeople and sales leaders, and we talk about reflective practice, and we have positioned reflective practice in this world which is changing so quickly. as being, potentially one of the biggest, most important competencies required of salespeople. How to make sense of what's going on around them. And I think you're right. I think that these kind of AI tools will encourage people to reflect more upon the data that they're able to get hold of very quickly, and then make better and informed decisions. So I think this is going to make that particular competence even more important, kind of moving forward. Slightly easier to do because you don't have to spend so much time researching, source material. It's at your fingertips. So you can spend more time thinking about what sense to make of it and what your response is going to be as a consequence of looking at the data. Yeah, so I think, but I think we're all at a bit of a early stage learning curve on it. So it's going to be really interesting to see how it sort of paves the way for a new future.
How do you recommend businesses/teams split account management and new business development? A lot of sales roles are a blend of account management, sales, then internal team management. For me, sales and account management are two different things. And those that excel at new business may not have the mindset to be an excellent account manager. That's an interesting question.
Ben, thanks for that question. So I think there's been some interesting LinkedIn commentary on it as well. I can't remember on a similar question, and no matter whether you're an account manager or new business, you need to have that hunting mindset that's important for new business. And I thought that was quite an interesting take that he had. And so coming back to the first bit of your question about how do you recommend businesses, teams split account management and new business development? What I've seen happen in a lot of the accounts we have is some kind of sales portfolio analysis where you start to segment. You go through a segmentation process where you start to look at the accounts on two sort of axes. One is potential to grow, and the other axis is sales volume. And then within those two axes, you're able to sort of group accounts into those accounts which have high revenue and high potential for growth. And then you've got those accounts that have high volume but mid-level, if you like, ability to grow. And then you've got some accounts which are high level, but they actually just want a transactional relationship. They don't particularly want an account manager to look after them. It's a transactional focus. I mean, I'm simplifying the segmentation process here a bit. I think that it's important that we start to consider the concept of lifetime value of an account over a period of time, and that there are going to be some accounts that are massively important to you that may not be buying so much from you in the future, in the current time frame, but are going to be hugely, potential growth accounts in the future. And I think that if you had this account management, new business development, if you didn't have those structures, in place, you run the risk of having a rather opportunistic approach to looking after accounts. And you run the risk of not being around to support those accounts when they really need your support moving forward. So my take on it is that it is a practice that I would recommend, that you would separate the two, but that you would, through white space analysis, have this new business development opportunities within your existing accounts that would be the focus of your attention, as opposed to completely new logos. But how you manage your account, I mean, it's a costly investment to put into account management. So you need to be very careful about balancing the cost of sale and cost of support with the amount of revenue that you're actually generating from the account. I think you may be interested in, maybe we could send it across to Ben, is we have a segmentation analysis sort of framework that may be quite helpful as well for you, Ben.
Yeah.
To consider how you might segment the different accounts and then and then how you support those accounts. So it's a bit difficult for me to explain on, it's sort of a matrix so that might be helpful as well. On your point, Nigel, I was working with Compaq before they were acquired by Hewlett Packard, and I was working with one of the Compaq account managers that was supporting Vodafone. And the Compaq account manager had done an amazing job to change the relationship with Vodafone from being pretty bad to being very good. And then when HP took over Compaq, they decided that they would put the HP account manager in as the lead on the account. And Vodafone basically told them to bugger off. And it was all based on the relationship. So I think your point about, often customers have a strong point of view about the sort of people that they want to sort of support them and how they want to support them. So I think you raised such a good point, in terms of using the customer feedback to influence how you then decide to support them.
Maybe you can comment on where do the most successful sales practitioners spend their time, and what kind of activities do they what are the most high value activities that a salesperson can do if there's only a set amount of time that we all experience? How should they be structuring or prioritizing their time?
I mean, there's some quite interesting research done around, where do star sales leaders spend their time versus those that don't reach targets or sort of don't perform quite as well, with their team. So if we start by just looking at the leadership kind of angle first, then the kind of areas that star leaders tend to spend more time than average sales leaders is going to be around strategizing, territory planning, territory management, making sure that the plans are properly in place. They'll spend much more time working with their salespeople in early sales cycle opportunities, and not just be there for salespeople at the when deals are due to be closed. They tend to spend more time coaching their sales teams rather than proper coaching, as opposed to sort of micromanaging around spreadsheets and data and statistics. So there's been, quite a lot of research in terms of where managers need to be kind of spending their time. When you start to look at the data of how much face-to-face time do salespeople spend actually talking to customers, it's quite low. I mean, it varies from sector to sector, and one must question the amount of non-productive kind of admin time that sales teams seem to be spending their time on, and a lot of that's driven with a micromanagement attitude of the leaders to whom they report into. So yeah, I mean, depending on which level we're talking about, there are different levers that can perhaps be pulled and adjusted. But I think I'm most excited about the role that some of the emerging technologies will play in making life easier for salespeople to get in front of customers and to spend more of their time doing what they should be doing, which is obviously selling to customers.
Yeah, Philip agrees. He's just put into chat, planning is a key area for greater productivity in sales. I also suspect that many companies don't know where their star performers / leaders spend their time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Yeah, we don't come across much current data which goes into this analysis of where time is being spent. It tends to be research projects that are carried off maybe once every 5 years or so, we start to see what the stats kind of tell us. But I agree with you. Yeah, Phil, it's not often that you find organizations are really closely monitoring where sales managers spend their time. On the master's program that we run, we get managers to to actually bring to us the data of where they spend their time. And that for us is a regular source of information, and it becomes a debate that we have with the masters cohorts about where they spend their time, and we link it, the data they produce, to some of the research we've seen in the past, particularly produced by Gartner. And we also link that kind of where you choose to put your time is influenced by your values and belief system. So it also links for us around, what is the purpose of a sales leader? What kind of results do they want to achieve for their team? How important is it for them to achieve results from everyone in their team moving forward?
I was very unhappy that we've got this question submitted to us.
What's that?
That Gartner research in 2021 said that 72% of buyers want a sales rep free experience. And in 2022, Gartner research says it's now 83%, that B2B buyers would prefer ordering or paying for a service through digital commerce. How, as a salesperson, should I react to this? And how does it influence in the way that I sell now?
Yes, it's quite interesting. And I think if you dig deeper into that research, I think that it also shows how the age demographic is influencing some of that data. I think I think it's millennials who are much, more digital savvy, and, they prefer that kind of method, perhaps, of doing their own research online and not engaging with salespeople. So how, as a salesperson, should I react to this? And I think that it's not altogether kind of negative in a sense. If it's possible for buyers to buy solutions without having to engage with salespeople, I would have thought that, that's not a bad thing, because you're meeting the needs of those buyers through a particular type of channel, which means that the sellers can spend more time, perhaps more quality time, focused on customers who do want that interaction, who do want those kind of relationships. I think what's interesting is that in a world, and we've talked about this quite a bit in the past, in the world that's changing very quickly, buyers don't always have the answers. And the only way they're going to find answers to particular problems that they have is through a heightened sense of collaboration, and both with people from within inside their own companies, but also with suppliers and partners. And this is where I think the role of salespeople is going to sort of develop much more strongly, sort of moving into the future. That the kind of skills that are going to be required of salespeople, given that there may be fewer opportunities, are going to be the more complex skills of problem solving, collaboration, co-creation. So yeah, I think as a salesperson, how should you react to this? I think that salespeople, need to kind of read the tea leaves. They need to look for ways of adding more value to the conversations that they have with customers. They perhaps need to be slightly more, the word that's being used is disruptive. They perhaps need to be more proactively creative in the way that they suggest ideas to customers before they start thinking of finding solutions to problems themselves. So I think it's going to mean that sales are going to have to work harder, to earn their bonuses and their commission, because they're going to have to add a degree of sort of intellectual acumen to the way in which they go about selling, and not just wait for the orders to come in, but actually to go out there and find them and make things happen. But I think those that do crack that particular code are going to be enormously successful.
It is interesting. And McKinsey came out with some interesting insight into what is the sort of how customer expectations are changing, and therefore what are the skill sets required for salespeople.
Yeah.
And we've actually, recently we did a podcast on that, and And it's interesting because customers' expectations are as such that they expect a salesperson to be a fantastic kind of problem solver and also, have information to hand at their fingertips. Because they're already coming into the conversation with a degree of knowledge around what it is you do. And so all of these kind of elements, I think, add to the competency levels of what is expected for a salesperson. And I think that's going to become more and more complex and more specialized, perhaps.
So if I can cast your mind back to the last AMA when you were talking about the mindset work that is transforming the performance of the England cricket team.
Oh, great talking about cricket.
Yeah. And in particular, the value in mindset change for sports people and how it's easy to detect. Individuals and teams win much more frequently when they lose when they have the right mindset. So are we safe in promising sales leaders that sales transformation based on mindset change will result in more deals and fewer losses?
Yeah, I think the great thing about sport is the fact you can see it sort of happening in front of you. It's so obvious where you've got, the same set of players playing under a new coach or a new manager, and, they're achieving sort of very, very different results. And, that's not a skill issue or a competence issue. That's down to, I guess, strategy in part. We're going to play this style of game, a mindset, and the mindset is one that's also supported with something we've spoken about before on these AMAs. I think it's about the psychological safety, allowing people the space to know that if you are playing to this plan and you're out there to play an expansive style of cricket, it's okay if you get out first ball. It's okay. We expect that will happen. And so genuinely allowing or creating that sense of, look, we're playing to this game plan. We hope you can score 150 runs, but you might not. Everyone's in it together, and we know what we're trying to do. And we've seen that in the transformative sort of cricket team that we spoke about before. I know from the work that we have done on mindsets with control groups in sales that the same applies. And it may not apply over 4 or 5 days of a test match series, because sometimes sales cycles take much longer to fulfill. But I know that where we have worked, particularly in my doctorate thesis, was working with different control groups, exploring this notion of mindset and measuring the close ratios and cost of sale ratios and market share ratios across teams that worked in Western Europe and Central Europe, in a market that were fairly similar in terms of opportunity. And seeing an extraordinary difference in sales performance over that period of time. And I've maybe cited this previously, but when we started working with this community of sales, there were about 200 salespeople in this sort of 2 groups, if you like. And the close ratios at the time were something like 1 in 15 for winning winning sort of reasonably sized deals, some very large. And by the time that we finished the program after 2.5 years, and this is published, this is published evidence and so on, the close ratios were 72%, and we contrasted it with the other control group where we hadn't done any intervention around mindset, and we simply sort of tracked their performance as business as usual. And they did improve their win ratios, from 1 in 15. They ended up with a ratio of 33% at the end of the 2.5 years. So from a control grouping point of view, it was an absolute test that mindsets can really impact performance. And for me, it completely changed the way that we started to approach the way we develop salespeople, and we develop managers as well. It's much easier, I think, to deal with a sales team where the mindsets are in the right place, but perhaps where the skill sets aren't where you want them to be, because it's much easier to work on developing skills and competence than it is changing someone's mindset. So I'd much rather get the mindsets in place as the sort of foundation block of any improvement that you might want to make in the selling organization, knowing that, yeah, if heads are in the right space, then you can do amazing things with people. Rather than those organizations which have incredibly competent people, but they're just demotivated, and there's this toxic culture that kind of exists that stops them from thriving. But we've seen many instances of managers going in, inheriting a group of people who have had brilliant results, and using a different type of management approach, completely transforming the team performance. So we have many examples of managers who've made this kind of dramatic transformation built around mindsets. And I think a lot of it is about growth mindset. Some people, they won't change, and they have a fixed mindset as opposed to growth. So growth mindset is incredibly important. But then it's also working on the specific sales mindsets that we, very close to our hearts here at Consalia, that we know will produce results.